important because of the conceptual and practical challenges that we see in evaluating adaptation. And I'm sure that you have talked long and hard about those in the past few days and the sessions that you've had yesterday and today. The difficulties are, of course, in determining what actually would constitute successful adaptation. One big issue that we're facing there is that we actually need to also be able to assess whether something is successful when actually nothing is happening. In development, we tend to, in international cooperation, we tend to identify success with things that happen on the ground. And in adaptation, quite often we want to see things not happening. And this issue of risk reduction is, of course, a crucial element in many adaptation efforts. And it requires new methodologies and new ways of looking at how we can evaluate this. And there is also another big challenge that which is lack of data, and the lack of data on not only on what is currently happening but also on what is expected to happen. So what we actually see is that we are operating in increasing uncertainties. We know that climate change is actually part of it is actually that the weather is becoming more unpredictable and it's becoming more extreme. And it is really important that we keep track of what is happening and are able to adapt to emerging situations. And this is also an issue, I think, that is important beyond the adaptation community itself, because actually this issue of being able to adapt to changing circumstances is something that we've wished for in the development community for a long time. We've had discussions about adaptive management that would help us bring success on the ground in many cases, and yet we have always had difficulties to identify what actually would constitute successful adaptive management. And this may provide an additional input into that discussion. So why is adaptation so important for the GEF? Well, the GEF is at the moment the biggest funder of adaptation activities in developing countries. And all in all, the GEF portfolio is reaching now approximately $500 million, and including co-financing, this now is more than $3 billion. So the number of projects and the funding is quite substantial, and this experience is already dating back from 5-6 years ago. So there is already emerging a portfolio of concluded projects that we can learn from. So the Least Developed Countries Fund and the Special Climate Change Fund for Adaptation and the Adaptation Fund itself. So we are also in a unique situation that we can actually integrate findings from these different sources. And we're currently working on that, because we have, with the exception of the Adaptation Fund, we have done evaluations about the portfolios of all these funds. And we are at the moment working on integrating the workshop and will include that as well in the further work that we do. So what is Climate-Eval then? And how can Climate-Eval be involved in this? Climate-Eval is a community of practice for individuals working on and interested in the evaluation of climate change and development interventions. And it's a venue for members to share good practices and information on these subjects. And our website, www.climate-eval.org, features an electronic library, a blog, a studies page, and a newsletter as mode of sharing evaluation reports, opinions, and tools relevant to our community. And online discussions on climate change and evaluation take place both on this website and on a LinkedIn group that we have established. And it's actually quite easy to link in to the LinkedIn group. So I would urge all of you to do that if you're not yet a member. And our moderator, Andrew Suberi, is always available to help and support people becoming members or interested in becoming involved in our work. What are some key messages that I would like to convey to you from us? Well, it's actually in line with our involvement through a webinar. We should, I feel, as a community of people interested in these conceptual issues and in the M&E aspects, the tools and methodologies and so on, we should continue to learn from each other. And setting this learning up in the right way from the start will help us immensely later on. If we create islands of learning, pockets of learning all over the world, this will lead to reinventing the wheel. But actually, with these opportunities that we have now through the new social media, through webinars like this, through the LinkedIn groups and others, we are actually able to become connected and stay connected and actually link up in ways that were previously unheard of. So I'm very happy to be part of this discussion, and I would also urge you to consider how these linkages can be made more permanent. Whether if anything is emerging on your site that would have a continued existence beyond the workshop, how can you link up to our community of practice? We are linked up to a community of practice in Southeast Asia. We are linked up to some other communities of practice as well, and more would just create a better situation for further learning, provided we are able to stay connected in the right way. So thanks very much. As I said, I cannot see what is happening over in Germany at your seminar, but it was a pleasure to be part of at least to provide this kind of input. Thanks very much.
So we've all started to think about M&E as a learning exercise rather than just as a reporting exercise. This is now built into all of our objectives, and we need to make sure that we actually live up to that. And so in this particular case, it's the PPCR and the LEG who have the responsibility to deliver on those particular examples. But I think all of us need to make sure that we're using monitoring and evaluation now as learning, as sharing, as a knowledge management tool, and not just for internal reporting. Learning by doing continues to be important, and we need to keep up exchange on suitable indicators. One idea that's come out of this conference is building a repository of not only indicators, but also of systems for collecting data, so that we can get a better idea of who is what, to prevent from reinventing the wheel multiple times, and to see if there's some sort of common grounds that we can arrive at. Fifth, building capacity for M&E at the country level, national and portfolio levels is a really big issue. There's a need for skills, finance and institutions. So it's not just about coming up with indicators, it's not just about developing a guidance and handing it on. An indicator is only as good as the way in which it is measured and the strength of the data that we have to measure it. So building capacity for people doing the monitoring and evaluation, especially at the country level, but also at the projects and program level, is really important. And we decided that this should be a priority activity as part of the M&E. Rather than something that is a responsibility of one agency or another, it really should be embedded in the whole system. And then finally, portfolio tracking should focus on tracking objectives and results rather than just tagging finance flows. So this is related to our first key message. We should track the proportion of adaptation objectives that are successfully achieved.
Okay, yeah, we had 4 groups and we had about 20 recommendations and 20 key messages. And I would like to ask the facilitators to put them on the screen. And we condensed them to 5 key messages and 5 recommendations. The first key message from the project level group is to involve local communities, relevant authorities and scientific perspectives early to be actively involved in setting the right objectives to guide monitoring and evaluation frameworks. The second one we voted for is to train the implementers on the concepts and methods underpinning adaptation, monitoring and evaluation so they are equipped to carry out monitoring. This is about the implementation. Then the third one, in order to generate evidence and enhance ownership and learning, monitoring and evaluation, should focus on products, experience and data, for example, and process, interaction, coordination and learning among different actors. The fourth key message of our group, and the fifth one is about knowledge management is a key for monitoring and evaluation of adaptation. And we see 2 different subjects related to this. We should learn from development experience, including the failures, because the failures will give us a lot of knowledge about what was not going well and what could be improved and what could be better in adaptation. And the second one, we should balance accountability and learning. We should not be afraid to learn because we are working on accountability, because accountability has the risk that we want to defend ourselves what we did and that we don't have the opportunity to learn. Then the next slide is about the recommendation. The first one is define clear and robust impact change, including relevant assumptions. I've heard that also in the other group. Then the second one is reflect on how outcomes were really achieved in addition to looking at the data. Then the third one is project level monitoring and evaluation should be based on a national level monitoring and evaluation system that provides orientation and harmonizes different donor projects. I've heard that also here in the finance group, so it's good that you have some common recommendations. And then the fourth one is about evaluation should find a balance between external independent review and to ensure accountability and involvement from project team to ensure learning. That's the same subject I mentioned just. So find the balance between learning and accountability and evaluation. And the fifth one, who can tell it? Who has a good, oh, there it is. Evaluate achievements of adaptation projects by comparing them to similar areas without a similar intervention. So compare an area where the project has been and an area where the project has not been and prove that your interventions has been successful. These were the most important recommendations. A thing what is not on the screen is that you have a flexible approach because adaptation is a new field. We have to learn, so keep it flexible and keep it open. Don't prescribe certain recipes how it should be done and be open to learn and to share experiences. Thank you.
Fantastic. So at this point, I'm sure there are a lot of comments on all of these because we got a limited time to discuss them in detail. Some groups came out with who should take responsibility. Are there comments and reactions from others in the plenary here that want to feed back on some of these priorities that they saw? And raise your hand if you would like to speak so we can get you a microphone. Was there broad agreement? Did they come out all with the same high levels of votes? Did some just barely miss the cut? I think we heard that at the project level, this flexibility was just below the cutoff, and it seemed like we wanted to keep it, but we stuck with,
yes,
only 5.
The problem was that the voting was a very short time, and we didn't have a good time to discuss exactly what was the meaning behind the things which were written on the papers.
Right.
And I think there is much more richness and knowledge in this group which could have been used to get a better understanding and a better definition exactly about what are the recommendations and the key messages. So I would recommend the organizers of the conference to look back at all the cards and say maybe we can bring them together and under certain headings, and so that you got more things out of the discussion, especially at the project level.
Great. Yeah. I'll deliver this to you.
I want to refer to the recommendation at the portfolio finance level that we should rather embark on tracking objectives and outcomes instead of tracking funding. I think that's a bright vision, and we should strive for that. I assume political reality still shows us that we, for a certain time being, still have to track funding, probably in climate finance at least up to 2020, in order to deliver on the Copenhagen Accord. But that's just the reality. I think we have to make the strong message that in the end we want to achieve results.
I think that's a great point. So one of the messages was aggregate what's aggregable. Our outcomes, can we aggregate outcomes? There's a comment back here. Get this over there quickly. Thank you. Oh, she's got it.
In the national level,
you got one.
in the vertical integration, we are talking not only about bottom-up integration, but top-down integration too. We need to put them together to integrate bottom-up and top-down.
Can you give me an example, what you're thinking of?
An example, we can't construct an M&E system without the participation of the directly involved people, but we need that people to know what the top level of the monitoring system, what results they have of this monitoring. So we need to monitor everything, but to demonstrate to the bottom level what the result is.
Great, thank you. Other comments? Ah, Heather.
Excuse me. Let me have a small attention on assumptions. Sometimes there was a discussion about assumptions, and I found in the guidelines making adaptation count an example, which I take for an example that assumptions are not well understood. And I think the three assumptions mentioned here are typical examples for the real obstacles why adaptation is not automatically going on. The first assumption is local partners have adequate incentives to participate. This is not non-influenceable. The second assumption is systems in place for fair allocation of resulting benefits. And the third assumption, income is not spent on maladaptive activities. And I think these 3 points are really the most important points we have to work about, and not so much technical or institutional or processual issues.
So recognizing that these assumptions will play strongly into the results that we get and incorporating that into M&E. Great. Heather, up front here.
Yes, I had two comments. The first was to follow on Gottfried's comment around finance and this question of what is aggregable. In this conflation of M&E with tracking finance, we are in danger of aggregating using dollar signs and pound signs and euros, things that are not quite the same, and this needs to be done quite carefully. There's been efforts to use the OECD DAC markers to track finance in portfolios, But those markers actually track the objectives of projects, not their benefits or even their dollar value. And there's then a conflation of a lot of things in a very valid effort to try to use existing systems. But it's an example of where we may really run into this. My other comment was to thank Art for using the word reflection in his group's presentation. This for me is a really critical part of monitoring and evaluation, and it's one that we haven't spoken too much about. Another missing term is alignment, and how we can best align monitoring and evaluation for adaptation with existing plans and existing policies in countries. So I wanted to reflect on those two.
Can I ask you, before you give up the mic, do you have a recommendation for the tracking finance question?
I have colleagues who are working extensively on this and have just put out two reports, one looking at UK Fast Start Finance and the other looking at US Fast Start Finance. And I can send you links to those. We didn't come up with clear answers, but in general it's a murky picture trying to track finance. I do, however, think it's going to be easier to track finance at the source, as my colleagues tried to do, rather than tracking it by projecting finance onto the activities, where we'll see this potential perverse incentive and work being done that is easily trackable for financial reasons, rather than skewing towards the work that is really needed and really conforms to the national plans and to the national objectives that have been established.
Great. Art, did you want to respond?
Yes, thank you for mentioning alignment. And you mean with alignment is the donor harmonization. Okay, that we use the same system, because the other one is the alignment to the national system was mentioned, is using existing systems. And for clarification, yeah, we always adhere to the principles of Paris, but in climate negotiations, these words are not very attractive. But I can assure you that in the adaptation framework, all the principles are embedded about ownership, alignment, participation, etc.
Great, thanks. May I see, where are the microphones? We have one here and one here. So let's take these two and then go to the webinar for any questions that are coming from online. So first in the back. Oh, yeah, that's you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I think I would just like to propose that we also should think about how could we incentivize having good M&E systems in place, like on different levels, because I think at each different level there are different interests behind creating an M&E system. So the donors will have different interests, which is probably about tracking finance. Then the national level will have different incentives and interests, and the local level as well. So maybe we should think about like a whole interlinked system of how can we create incentives for the local level, maybe to report back to the national level, and then the national level can report back to the donors. So just have like an interlinked system and think about what are the different interests behind having an M&E system and behind the outcomes of an M&E system, and how can we create the effective and relevant incentives for that, to get also the M&E system and process out of its status of being the poor cousin.
That's a great point. So the common thread there is the national, I think, because you would have those incentives then in terms of financing and access to central services and resources to the local level, and also those signals to donors in terms of what needs funding. Great. Guido.
Yes, I think I step now on dangerous grounds, because I start to challenge a bit the point Art raised on we should not develop new structures for M&E, but instead use existing ones. From my own experience, I feel a little bit uncomfortable with this, because I think with this climate change and the way we look at, we need to look at development is probably very different than we have been looking in the past on development. And I think we have to look as well the tools we use for assessing this and how we use the tools. And probably speaking now more from the MDB experience, I don't think that we can continue to do evaluation the way we have been doing in the past in an environment with high level of uncertainty. I think high level uncertainty requires us to not only monitor what's going on, but assess our assumptions. And M&E has an important role to assess our assumptions on a more regular basis than actually we probably do right now. Yes, I know that some bilaterals have evaluations in midterm and have evaluations at the end. MDBs often have only project completion evaluations. Then it's far too late to actually assess your assumptions. So I think there's probably a need for us to think outside of the box and think whether the way we have been discussing here M&E is still the way we should discuss M&E, or whether we should look more M&E as in terms of developmental evaluations, and putting much more emphasis that evaluations need to happen on a more regular basis, because we need more deeper analysis and information to adjust our strategy. Because at the end of the day, I think what climate change requires us is to adjust our strategy more often than we probably did in the past.
Great points. I think that came up also in another group, which mentioned the need to not just manage one kind of risks, climate risks, but all of these other risks that play a role, and I think assumptions captures that quite well. Nana, do we have any questions from the webinar?
Yeah, we have one question, for example, coming in. What is the importance of community-based processes in monitoring and evaluation? That could go to Art at the project level, or possibly to Nambi, who was speaking on this earlier.
I think, I don't remember if this is one of our recommendations here, but that one of the points raised in our discussion was the community involvement. And I think this has to come back in when you reconsider the material.
So we need to make sure that that appears in the summary material. Are there other comments on community-based adaptation and M&E from that perspective that the plenary wants to contribute? Yeah. Ashley, behind you here.
As I mentioned in the morning, the entry points are very important, because the needs of the communities are so different. So you lay a foundation for your work by identifying the right needs and the right kind of stakeholder participation. This has been reiterated and reiterated, stating the obvious, but still it's very important for us to understand the dynamics which are existing within the system there in a community in terms of the people cooperation or the felt needs of the community. That's just a good starting point for everything.
Do you want to say something about how in India you used community access to climate data as a way to support implementation and evaluation?
Yeah, there is a kind of it's always important to cross-check the existing traditional knowledge system which is there in terms of whatever they apply on a day-to-day basis, plus the scientific elements, what you think from the external world, what we are giving them. So it should be built on the existing traditional elements which are there, in terms of how they understand the weather, how they practice farming. So it is important for us to
Just to add one more point to what you said, the question was the that they really wanted to advance, and that then established the objectives for the M&E system so that they saw their words in the program. Did you want to add something, or can we get more feedback on this question? Sorry, Jessica first, and then we'll come here.
Just two things on the role of communities which came up on our table and also came up at the recent international workshop on community-based adaptation, in which there was a session on the role of communities in monitoring and evaluation. The first thing that came up was that aggregate or portfolio level indicators at some point need to be informed by what's going on the ground. And I think everybody agreed that you have to you start with your reality and what's driving it, and then things can be aggregated that you need to make sense on the ground. But the second thing that came up in the CBA workshop was that actually communities and in other countries. So I think we usually tend to advocate for, bottom-up high-level indicators, and that's absolutely right. But at the same time, there needs to be a stronger feedback loop coming back down to communities who have a right to know what was effective elsewhere and what the information that they are generating is being used for. And the third thing to note is that this just also links back to the tracking finance point that was made earlier. It's not just donors that want to track finance. Communities want to know where the money is coming from, and they want to know where it's slipped along the way and how much money actually reaches them and what it's being used for. So I think it's an accountability question all the way through. It's not just donors that want to know where the money's going.
Excellent. Oh, you have it. Yep, great.
I would like to recall the example that was raised yesterday with Ethiopia, where the community-based programs and the pastoralist programs, suddenly the issue of the dam and how far that was jeopardizing the result of those programs. You could say that the dam is also an adaptation project. And I like to phrase it that this is actually a very political issue. So we talk about maladaptation and adaptation, but the different forms of adaptation that may contradict one another or serve different interests. That's an issue, of course, that we do not cover here, but is depending very much at the national level, how far policymakers decide what the priority for adaptation should be. And some countries may prioritize the dams and others may prioritize the community-based adaptation. That's still a very important issue, and we cannot address that, but we'll be addressed there.
Excellent. Nana, another question?
Yeah, the discussion around do we need more than business as usual M&E raised or started some discussion also in the blog. There was a support to this idea. Yes, we do need more than business as usual M&E, and that led to several questions now in the webinar on capacity development for M&E adaptation. So several questions are around that. What is available as capacity development for M&E adaptation?
Great question, and I saw that come up in all three of these summary slides, was the need to build capacity around monitoring and evaluation. Any examples out there of successful capacity building for adaptation, monitoring, and evaluation at any of these scales? Any plans to do capacity building for monitoring and evaluation? Yeah?
There was also the mention, I think, in the Zambia presentation this morning of some capacity building.
You want to remark on that? Can I get your comments?
I think basically for the Zambian situation, we had started with some capacity building, first with the key players, the ones who are going to, from different sectors who would do the development of the M&E framework. So we had some project management training for those. But ultimately, because of also the way we have our structure, it will be very important to even go down to the lower levels to make sure that we also have capacities built for those, because in those areas also there is limited technical capacities.
Great. Yeah. Go first here and then to Christoph.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, during the process of developing our M&E for the African Development Bank, we tried to make the process of developing the framework the capacity building process by involving the whole department within the bank and within the regional member countries. And the next step, even not only for initiation, but also for reviewing the first draft, and through the process is the consultation process. After the development, a training program is planned, and training for methodology, how to use it, and then a testing. This will involve also bank-wide and regional member countries. So the process of developing this M&E could be a capacity building process.
So by engaging people at all of the steps, it was a capacity.
And consulting.
And I imagine that when you begin to have methodologies that may not be completely straightforward, where you have, you know, imperfect measures of things that
testing, feedback, revisions, improvement, and so on.
Great.
Yeah.
Christoph?
Yeah, a word on capacity building for M&E at the communal level. I'm very much in favor of this, but then at the same time also a word of caution. I think whatever capacity is being built at the communal level for M&E has to be very much embedded with the other steps of the process. So M&E at the communal level is basically the cousin of good planning and implementation. We tried a communal process when I still managed the rural development program in Vietnam. And we tried to make it very much a part of a sequence of steps, this M&E, no? And not a separate package for M&E. And I think that's indeed very important, because especially at the communal level, this link between what do I do and how do I measure it cannot be overemphasized.
Guido, you want to respond?
Yes, just a couple of words on capacity development on M&E. There are actually in the climate investment funds, countries have chosen different models to do this. Actually, some countries are going for they have components in their investment plans actually which are focused on building the capacity and usually building the institutional setting for doing the implementing the investment plan or implementing the strategic program for climate resilience, because the CIF is designed as a programmatic approach. So it's in the design already requires that the reporting is actually against the investment plan or the SPCR. So countries are already starting to change their institutional setting. And one of the feedbacks we have received so far from the pilot countries is capacity development is very much on their agenda, because they see that even if you put the institutional structure in place, you still need the capacity to actually do this. So countries have very different ways. Second, we try as well within the climate investment fund units to develop some kind like case studies where we work intensively with some of the countries and work out what have been the challenges they have faced in developing their investment plans, M&E section or the results frameworks, and try encourage these countries to go out and share this with the other pilot countries, and particularly how they have overcome some of these difficulties or barriers. And we hope through this process that we can bring as well other partners into who actually can help us in building the capacity at the national level, because I think that's where we want to operate it as the climate investment fund. So be it the CLEAR initiative, particularly to building local capacity, or be it the bilaterals like the DFID or GIZ, who have a comparative advantage of actually doing capacity development over long term, and as well UNDP in this respect.
Great. Can I ask you to pass that to Barbara? And maybe we can start right now introducing yourselves before you make a comment.
Okay, so you already know my name is Barbara. Fröde Tierfeld, I'm working with EcoConsult, a consultancy company here in Germany, and together with Jenny and some others here in the room, I worked on the so-called OECD training for integrating climate change adaptation into development planning, which was finally published by GIZ last year. And this training, among other modules, also includes a module on M&E, and is the fourth step of this four-step approach that you may all know from the OECD policy guidance. And my impression is from the training, and that exactly backs up what Christoph already said, you can't separate the M&E thing from the planning, and also to see that we walk people through the first three steps of assessing the vulnerability, identifying options, selecting options, and then when you come to your M&E system, you get the broader overview of putting together a whole strategy, and I find that a very useful thing, and I'm sure that OECD can provide all the links.
Great. So we have a model there. This sounds like one of those inputs to better knowledge sharing, knowledge management, and using some of the networks that we have on this topic of capacity building. I can also feedback on some of this other topics that people want to raise. One here, yeah.
My name is Emilia Abramova. I work with the Center for International Forestry Research, and I just want to highlight the issue of information technology and information and communication technology and how to make use of it, because things like mobile phones and video and radio could really enhance the monitoring and evaluation process, and also in relation to some issues that we've discussed. One example is a project that IIED did with participatory video for evaluating adaptation in Africa, which worked really well with sharing these videos in certain communities with other communities, but also to the national level to communicate this message. So I think we need to a bit more deliberation on how to make use of such technologies.
Excellent. So we initially came down to this roadmap, which was very quick and very narrow. It was 5 recommendations and 5 messages from each of these levels. And now we've sort of started to bring back in a lot of the other issues that didn't make the sort of our top 10s. I think what will come out of this workshop is all of that knowledge that you all gathered. And when we did the listing of who should take responsible for these actions, I want to ask if there are other people in the room that would like to either request or offer that they will be able to do something with one of these next steps at any of the levels, so we can take that down as well. Can I ask one of the panelists to start us off? They have no choice.
Well, I suppose I can raise that IIED is working with DFID on an initiative called Tracking Adaptation and Measuring Development, in which we're taking forward the principle that high-level indicators for adaptation should be based on realities in country. And so a framework of a sort of high-level framework has been designed. There's a paper out which is available on the IIED website. But this framework is now being taken to 5, possibly 6 countries, where it is going to be tested. And in each country, there's going to be a long scoping phase in which national systems are going to be reviewed, data collection systems are going to be reviewed, priorities are going to be reviewed. We're going to look at how national priorities fit or don't fit into the framework, revise the framework accordingly, and in that way work with DFID to see if we can come up with some sort of high-level framework that is actually based on national-level priorities and is usable with national-level systems. Obviously, that's going to involve significant capacity building, but the idea is to give countries a system to monitor and evaluate climate investments coming into their country. So of course it will inform us as a community of practice, it informs donors about how to make more effective adaptation investments, but at the end of the day, the users of this framework are the countries themselves who will then be able to make better decisions and raise the platform for dialogue on more effective adaptation decisions. And the other thing to add is that in this initiative we're working with several others to try and create a sort of a broad church around these principles. We're working with WRI, we've been in dialogue with ODI and several others of the people in this room, and we very much see it as the framework's based on the principle of open source, and we hope that, you know, that we've seen the same principles come up again and again. We're obviously all behind it, so we hope that we can, you know, use this as a platform for collaboration to try and drive these principles forward.
That's fantastic. Other, yeah.
Yes. I also found out today that Potsdam Institute for Climate Research has a platform called CI Grasp. I only found about it today, and there are several countries that have sort of their vulnerability profiles and the mapping of vulnerabilities up in the web page. But there is also sort of a comprehensive review of the adaptation programs and projects that are being developed at the national level. And this can be sort of a first step for developing M&E for the portfolio level of a country. And I mean, we have to sort of build upon what's already done. If the Potsdam Institute has already sort of come up with a good sort of survey, or all the things that you need to put into the database that relate to a project, we could probably use that to sort of build upon and come up with the indicators that we need to evaluate and monitor projects and portfolios.
So would Columbia use a public type of platform, or would that be something that you would imagine using internally?
That is something that we would like to see. I mean, if it's developed internationally, that would be great because we could learn what they're doing in, you know, Morocco about drought, or in Australia, in extensive flooding. But that is something that we're working upon, you know. We're trying to sort of make the portfolio of projects available to everyone. In a platform, we have a climate change web portal that's a public web portal. But we would, I mean, if it's an international sort of exchange platform, we would be happy to sort of upload our projects into it.
So there's one incentive that we talked about, incentives for sharing this kind of information. Other responses? Art.
Yes, there was one task in your group assigned to the task team on the DAC epoch on the climate change, and tomorrow will be the meeting in Paris, which I will chair together with Switzerland, and we will raise this request from the group and discuss it there at that platform and see if we can support you on this issue.
Perfect, very concrete. So the OECD DAC meeting tomorrow, which will address also M&E for adaptation, Art will be chairing and will present the request for more exchange and sharing on this subject. I heard also some request for another forum, face-to-face, similar to this one, in more depth. What are thoughts on that? Would people be interested in revisiting this subject sometime down the road? I thought there was more support than that. Yeah, Kito. Do you have a, does somebody have a microphone nearby? There we go.
Finally, I should introduce myself. Kito, Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist, Climate Investment Fund. Actually, there is, we are organizing our partnership forum in November, and we are actually planning to have a session on M&E on adaptation and mitigation. So in this M&E session, we will talk, I think a lot of these issues we're raising here will actually be discussed as well, because we want to, what I mentioned before, to get the case studies, to have the countries telling us the story, what they are experiencing. And this will be one of the forum, we will have one of the sessions. We could organize something around this one, because I think a lot of people will anyway participate in this event in the partnership.
Fantastic.
It's the 6th and 7th of November.
6th and 7th of November.
Yes.
Where is it?
In Turkey, Istanbul.
In Istanbul. Okay, good. Can you pass that behind you to Peter? And introduce yourself.
Thanks. I'm Peter Schultz from ICF International. I was looking for an excuse to say this, and I think this is my excuse. For the folks that are on the webinar, this has been a really wonderful forum. And so I haven't been in cahoots with the organizers in saying this, but I've had a lot of offline discussions. And the discussion that you're seeing here is kind of this is one of the more difficult conversations. We have people at the front and we have people out here in the audience, but for the people on the webinar, this has been a really rich discussion. And I'd like to thank the organizers from GIZ and everybody that's been involved in putting this together. It's been a wonderfully facilitated event. The sort of just the physical forums that we've had in the other sessions have led to some really rich discussions. We've just seen the cream on the top, just the very sort of tip of this iceberg in the presentations here, but there have been really rich discussions throughout the last 2 days, and I just want to extend my thanks, and I hope that we can have other rich exchanges in the future. So thank you.
So that sounds like a potential vote for getting together in the future. Here's one in the back.
My name is Maria Victoria Chiriboga. I'm from the Ministry of Environment of Ecuador. And our group at the national level put this subject on the table because we believe that maybe monitoring and evaluation is not the only thing that we need to discuss at this technical level. There are other subjects, like for example, vulnerability assessment, different methodologies, and many other, like for example, how we're working on or what methodologies we have used to create create our national programs or national adaptation plans, what are best practices, and then the implementation on the ground. So we did believe that it was very important to create some sort of either forum, a permanent forum, or partnership to keep exchanging all these different knowledge that we have been creating at the national levels, at all of our different countries, as well as the cooperation and agencies that have been helping out with this creation and of the adaptation system, to say it that way, at the international level.
Wonderful. So we need to do this practitioner level exchange on more than just the subject of M&E. I think we will continue to see that demand. We have just one more minute. What I might say in closing is that if you aren't already registered on the Climate-Eval Community of Practice, that might be one way that we can leverage existing systems and stay in touch with one another. And we can also consider what is the appropriate mode of follow-up from this, what would this community really like to see, and so those kinds of suggestions would be welcome to the organizers of the event. Let's give a thanks to our panel and to all the questions that came from the webinar. Hand it back to you.
So, thank you very much. For our last session of this workshop, reflections on the way forward, I would like to invite one last time representatives of the organizers behind this workshop to come on stage and to react, to respond to what they have heard now here in the session previously. So for the Adaptation Partnership, I would like to ask Antwi Boasiako Amoa, for DFID, Shalaja Anamraju, for the BMZ, Gottfried van Gemmingen, and for USAID, Jennifer Franklin-Reed. Again, you could have just remained here on stage. And I would also like to invite Vera Schultz here as the moderator of this last session. Vera is heading the Climate Change Competence Center within GIZ. So I hand the word over to you, Vera.
Thank you very much. So I hope Gottfried and Jalala are coming. So this is the closing session, and we are already a little bit running out of time, so I think we will be quite brief. We have already heard from Jenny what could be the next steps. So some people tomorrow are going to Paris for the OECD DAC meeting, and we understand that some of the results, recommendations, key messages of this workshop will be conveyed at this meeting tomorrow in Paris. We have also heard that there will be a workshop from PPCR in November where some of our findings here can be maybe picked up and further discussed. And maybe we also have the opportunity in one of the next COPs or in the SB next year to convey another meeting like this from the same organizers maybe. So these are some of the next steps we can take from here. But what I would like to ask you now, what are your very personal takeaways from this meeting? Maybe we start with you speaking for the Adaptation Partnership. Please, what are your very personal takeaways, and what will you do maybe differently when you go back to the office tomorrow or the day after tomorrow?
Thank you very much. I think if you have a lengthy talk and with so much divergent views and other things, nothing much more to say because I'm not a good summarizer, but I would say that in the past, we used to do things spontaneously and unplanned. But for our past 2 years, we're trying to think that thinking sustainably and looking at the long term is always the surest way to go, even though it's quite expensive to do that. But the long-term benefit of it, it's very good. And adopting M&E adaptation is one of the surest way, and it's right away a long-term perspective of coherent, bringing things together and making sure adaptation work for governments for the community level and then also for donors as well. So for me, it works very well. What we've gone through is just a very way of trying to bring all stakeholders on board. And stakeholders here, I mean donors, government, and then the community to think of what we can do for ourselves in the long term. I would say that there isn't much that I've been missing because we have had a very diverse discussion. So taking home today, I would advise that there are key things that we need to do, and that has to do with having a solid system, structures, institutions with the necessary capacity to deliver on some of these new issues that we're talking about. And then I'm also taking home that to do this, you need a very solid baseline information and data, which is very key. And then also taking home is you need collaboration of all stakeholders, particularly when it comes to funding. It's not only donor-driven, but this is a situation where you need countries also putting in their lots, because at the end of the day, countries are the beneficiaries. So these are the key messages that I'm taking home. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you can hand over the mic to Gottfried. Gottfried, what will you do differently next week in your office? Or is there anything which was very new to you and you have never heard about and now is, inspiring you for M&E of adaptation?
First, I'm inspired by this community. As I mentioned, I think at the very beginning, adaptation for me is a refreshingly vague issue. And monitoring and evaluation is even more dry. And I'm really impressed by the motivation, by the euphoria, and also the response on the web worldwide to this topic. Also, when we, at the beginning, when we talked internally about what, how should we reflect probably on that, on the workshop, there was the question whether the workshop has increased the mystification of M&E adaptation. And I think, at least for me, it has contributed to demystify it. And that's, I think, a very good result. What will I do differently? I think I'm more convinced to look into if I have to screen project proposals, what kind of indicators are put in there, and get probably even stricter on that. That is important, and also to look for that baselines are set and being done. And I think we have a lot of work. Not only if I get back to my desk, but because I will not get back to my desk, I will also follow the whole flock of people on the train at 6:45 from Cologne to the OECD meeting tomorrow. I think we have a lot of stuff to discuss tomorrow, as Art mentioned also. And I think important issue is that we have to discuss on tracking impacts, tracking successful adaptation on the portfolio level. I think that's very important. Also, it has some repercussion on what is being discussed next week here at the climate negotiations with regard to the national adaptation plans. I think there's a lot of substance to also increasingly, or gradually, but increasingly focus on effectiveness. I think that is very important. We have to reflect on that. I remember we throw that into the negotiation group, in the NUP negotiation group in Durban, just the word adaptation effectiveness. And people were grappling with it, and somehow it was scrapped again. So I think we should be empowered to do it again. And I think one good proposal for a future topic was mentioned by our representative from Ecuador to focus shed a little bit more light into vulnerability assessments. I think that's a very good topic where I think we, and first of all myself, need to learn much more. Thank you.
you hand over to Jenny. Jenny, is there anything you will do differently? Anything which was astonishing to you? And with all the key messages and recommendations, did we manage to demystify a little bit all these uncertainties and complexities, which is really sometimes overwhelming?
Yes, I think the thing that struck me was how much experience there is out there. I think these forums are very useful because there are so many practitioners out there doing this that we don't always get to hear from. So I found that very useful. And I think it also was useful to help all of us understand the different points of view that come together on this topic. So whereas the community level project implementers have a certain point of view, they now maybe understand some of the other questions and requirements that might be coming from a national level, for example, or the fund. So I think it's very useful for all of us to understand who we're working with and how we can work best together. What I take away is some topics for action, sort of an agenda on two levels. One is research and review and learning more about what we can bring to this field from other areas of experience, whether that's different methods for doing impact evaluations, whether that's how to make practical cost-benefit analyses for adaptation, which is not a simple task, to an agenda for action. Then what can we do? Where are we seeing these things being applied and tested? And on that point, I would hope to leverage really the good work of others who already have these kinds of things underway. I also take away this question I don't know exactly how to approach, but I will bring it back to Washington, which is how to overcome the challenge that projects cannot be responsible for those longer-term evaluation questions of impact, and how we can figure out how to solve that challenge. And I don't know, but I will have that discussion when we go back. And finally, I just wanted to make sure that everyone got to know Ashley Allen, who is going to be responsible for the work at USAID on evaluation, monitoring and evaluation. And I know that adaptation, monitoring and evaluation. And I know that she already knows many of you, but you will be seeing more of her. Thanks.
Now comes DFID. I remember there was about 1 or 1.5 years ago we met in Delhi. And do you see any development? We were also talking about M&E, and do you think that something has changed in the last month? Last year, yeah.
On the question of what is adaptation and what's resilience, and a lot of us reflected then that the previous meeting to the Delhi meeting, we'd seen a lot more coherence. And I'd say the same is on monitoring and evaluation. Although I must say the most cogent discussion in Delhi was the one on M&E. So it's clearly that the practitioners in M&E are learned individuals. So I think one of the things that I'm noticing is as the whole adaptation agenda progresses, so is the M&E agenda. And so it's keeping pace. And that's really good, because one of the key learning points for me over and over again, although I know it, is, do start early, plan it well, really try to embed it within a project documentation, and really think about why you're doing this. And the theory of change reduces your need to have hundreds of indicators. It cuts it all down. So that early planning does make a difference, and it's another. It comes back again really strongly at this session as well. The only other thing I wanted to say was that I was again struck by this whole concept of harmonization and coordination on a number of levels. Struck by the presentation by Nepal about how they're looking at institutional development across a range of levels, a climate change coordination mechanism, and then several of similar types. And And then similarly, again, in the Bangladesh context, where people are talking about institutional structures of a coordination nature that need to be put in place. And then at the international level, the real need for us to be talking about coordinating across some of these parallel funds. There is obviously more work to be done there, and for that reason, I do think, you know, whether we're talking about another session of this sort or something that brings these kind of joint practices together as we develop them is a really useful thing at this stage.
Thank you. Well, with these key messages and also with the recommendations, we have a bit of a kind of a roadmap or agenda. Now, we were also talking about the next steps. Do you have any idea in what kind of forum or which kind of form we could continue to discuss or can kind of, transfer our knowledge we were kind of grasping here, other than the OECD DAC meeting, maybe another workshop in the framework or before next SB? Do you have any idea where we can convey our messages and how?
I mean, one thing that came out of one of our sessions is that obviously these points in time when we meet to consolidate what we've been learning all year are really useful. And I do think that we need to continue this. The agenda is moving so rapidly that even in 6 months' time we'll start to see differences and more capacity built. But one thing that came up is that there is really an interest for exchanges and networks, and I don't know how that would develop. It could, and also a need to distinguish between, so that it's clear from the onset, we're talking about a project level or a portfolio level, so that we're not constantly having this debate. What are you talking about? And what are you talking about? What entities for what? Anyway, that came up in our session: networks or exchanges, and real some form of platform to doing so.
Do you think we have the GEF Eval? Is that a good network, or is it also necessary to meet in this kind of a physically group learning, maybe also from case studies and so on? Do you think it's necessary?
Straight back to me again.
Sorry, whoever would like to answer.
I think points in time like this are useful to consolidate. People listen better than they read.
I think regarding the question you asked, how do we take this process forward? I have an example. I belong to another informal group for negotiation. We call it Cartagena Dialogue Group, which is actually doing a fantastic job. I think some of the members are here around. And maybe the organizers can also contact this group and then see how they've been moving their processes forward. So regarding adaptation M&E, we can study from this Cartagena group. It's non-formal group, and then it's also, it cut across all the negotiation blocks. So we have all the blocks coming together with common ideas just to influence negotiation processes informally, and it's been working very well. So probably we can also study from this group and see how they've moved their process forward.
Cartagena group is another format. Gottfried and Jenny, any other idea?
I think we have got some ideas where we can meet again. What kind of processes we may use. I will become probably tomorrow a member of Climate-Eval. I like also the setting, probably apart from the acoustics here, but that's the only disadvantage. I think we used some innovative communication formats, which we also did the last time, some 2 months ago, when we had a workshop just here about adaptation and private sector. And I have the feeling if we like also to talk about adaptation, M&E adaptation and related issues in this format, with new or innovative formats of communication and discussion, I think we should look for ideas how we can follow up the discussion we had, and which will evolve in the next month. and just envisage, for example, early next year or back to climate negotiations, a similar event here. I like to, or I really got in the mood in trying out these new, these very innovative things like fishbowl discussions and things like that. And if it helps us, I think we should be aware that this is something, an instrument which we can continue to use.
Now it's not ladies first, but ladies last. Please, Jenny.
I think if we gather again, I might throw out there that every participant bring a framework or bring their M&E question or plan or whatever it is, which Guido is holding up proudly. Let the rest of us catch up and then we'll do the same. But I think that if we were all using the opportunity as a working workshop, that could be actually very constructive. And I think we got a very quick introduction to a lot of this experiences out there, but if we really got hands-on with some of the materials, that would be very useful. And I think in the meantime, hopefully there is a way for us to share what we're working on through one of these networks, and I would happily contribute to that.
Just a quick one to everyone bring in maybe some sort of framework to discuss. What we'll be using in the Cartagena group is like we have working teams. Here there are three main teams. You have the portfolio group, you have the national level group, and then you have the project level group. We can sort of form working teams within these groups, and then they can come out with a proposal within that particular group, so that when we meet anytime, or anytime the next time we meet, there is something to discuss within the portfolio group, then there's something on M&E from the national level to work on, so that you have something to start with, so other people will just give in. So we can form working groups within the platform. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good. Now we come to the final little slot. That is what we call in India the vote of thanks. So I cannot let you going without. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the BMZ, DFID, and USAID, and the Adaptation Partnership to have made this workshop possible, and also some of the investment funds who have contributed to finance this occasion here in Bonn. I also would like to thank the City of Bonn to give us this framework of Bonn Perspectives. This is a kind of a series of events, and I would also like to thank here the City of Bonn. I would like to thank again the speakers from yesterday morning, Sabine and Heather, who have delivered the keynote speeches, and the permanent and not so permanent members of our fishbowl exercise. I would especially thank the members of the Competence Center for Climate Change in GIZ, Nana and her team, Julia, Nadia, also team who have prepared and organized all the logistics related to this event, and that also includes Argens. You are standing here in the back, just wave your hand. And last but not least, I would like to thank all the participants for your very, very lively and intense discussion. So go back safely and see you next time, and probably around in Bonn next week. Thank you very much.
Of course, I cannot let you go without three final housekeeping messages that I have to make. No, the first one is the documentation of this workshop can be found on the website of the Bonn Perspectives. Yeah, there's a website where you could download all the agenda and everything, the participants list, and the presentations will be uploaded there right away, unless those presenters who handed them in object and say, no, I want to work it over or not have it on the website. Otherwise, they will be uploaded there. The full presentation of the workshop can be found there by the end of May. Yeah, so by the end of May, you can download it there. Secondly, somebody forgot a laptop. You can pick it up at the registrations. I was about to say 20 minutes, it's mine.
And then, Fabian, very last one. Thank you very much for your very good moderation, and hope to see you again as well.
Thank you.
Please give him a hand.
Thank you.